Welcome, Mishpacha. I'm excited to share with you today our next speaker, Robert C. Newman, who will be sharing with us on science and the Jewish Bible. In 1967, Robert earned his PhD from Duke University in physics. In 1970, he earned a separate PhD at Cornell University in astrophysics. In addition, he has done research on cosmic gas dynamics, including studying quasars and galaxies. He also has a master's in theology and has completed graduate work on the Jewish Bible, the Tanakh. Dr. Newman is co-author of 4 books. Among these is Science Speaks and What's Darwin Got to Do with It? A Friendly Conversation on Evolution. He has published a number of articles in magazines, scientific, and theological journals. Dr. Newman is an expert in rebutting arguments that claim to show the incompatibility of science with the Bible. Let's welcome Dr. Newman as he shares some insights that will be new to you and to me. Welcome to Tikvah Radio Show, Dr. Newman. We are so glad to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Liliana. It's good to be with you, and I hope we'll have a good time here in our interview.
Yeah. So, Dr. Newman, you mentioned in an article that you were asked by Jewish doctors to answer the following question: is the Bible scientifically reliable? Can you share some of the answer you gave these doctors?
Yes, I believe the Bible is scientifically reliable. But that depends somewhat on our definition of science. And so I talked a little bit about 2 alternative definitions of science, and then talked some about cosmology and fine-tuning and evolution and that sort of thing in comparing the evidence of science and what the Bible had to say.
Okay. So talking about science, in your opinion, what are the most 2 common modern definitions of science today?
There's what we might call the technical understanding that most scientists have, or at least that the scientific establishment has, and that is science is an attempt to understand reality, or let's say nature, by means of only purely natural causes. Perhaps the more common definition of science in popular thought is that science is an attempt to understand nature. And that means if nature is only a result of purely natural causes, then yes, you'd understand it that way. But if nature, in fact, has been influenced strongly by supernatural causes, then you ought to understand it that way. You ought to, as some philosophers say, you ought to take the explanation that is actually fits the data best, rather than being artificially constricted to a naturalistic explanation.
Okay, so the second definition for science would be one that you agree with, and how would you describe that?
My definition of science would be that science is an attempt to understand nature, and understand nature as it really is, and as it has really been. And if this then requires supernatural causes to explain, then so be it. And if it doesn't, then so be it.
Right.
And I personally think there's good evidence that we are looking at a universe in which God has played a decisive role, both in the origin of the universe and in the development of particularly living things and their nature and reality and such.
Okay. So, in your opinion, do you think that most scientists go along with the first or second opinion? You know, what?
I'm guessing that at least the what we call the gatekeepers of science are very much concerned to go with the first definition, the definition that science does not allow supernatural causation. What percentage of actual practicing scientists believe this, I'm not absolutely sure. There are certainly evidence from a number of remarks that people who believe that God has been involved find it dangerous to their careers to talk much about that, and have had to lay low in order to avoid being blackballed, if you like.
Well, that's a really strong statement, that it's so important about how you present your facts and your data, that it could cost you your career, your job.
Yeah. Yes.
In the field of science. That's, well, we're supposed to be in a free society, so you should be able to speak up and say, well, this is, what I believe in this area, know. And you're saying that's really not true in our society.
Well, I'm saying that there are certain topics, if you like, in the area of science that are dangerous to get near, if you like, in that area. Mm-hmm. They're kind of like touching the third rail on a subway or something and getting electrocuted.
Those are strong words, and this country wasn't founded with that thought in mind when people came here to live in freedom. So that's sad, to be honest with you. It's really sad to hear that. So back to something that you mentioned earlier when we first started up. You mentioned the word cosmology.
Yes.
And so the science of cosmology, what would that definition be?
Cosmology is an attempt to understand the universe as a whole, rather than all the little details, the universe as a whole, by looking at the data that we've actually got. And of course, we're in just a small part of the universe. We think we can now see a substantial fraction of a good bit of the universe anyway. We can see out to perhaps maybe as far as 10 billion light years in all directions. But we're trying to understand it from what we can see and the information that's reaching us here at this time in the history of the universe. And so obviously that involves some extrapolation, speculation, something of that sort. But we've got lots of data, and particularly have gotten lots of data in the last 30, 40 years with your bigger telescopes and your satellites and various other ways of looking at different wavelengths that humans can't see with their own eyes. We actually don't know how big the universe is, but there's reason to believe we're seeing near all of it that we may be capable of seeing, since it looks like we are seeing back getting close to when the first stars light up, if you like, and hopefully this new space telescope that will be going up here in a couple years, or a few years, hopefully, will give us some more information, but we're probably not going to get beyond that. So the universe might be a lot bigger, but that's what we can see.
So even with the amazing information we're getting right now, we're just only able to get a little bit of everything that's out there. I mean, that's just...
Yeah, that's hard to say. Well, it's possible there's a lot more. I would guess there's probably a lot more, but we don't know. Part of science is trying to figure out what we can from what we've got, and sometimes you don't know how much that is. So we can look down at the smallest particles we can detect, which are things inside the nucleus of the atom, and we get what we call quarks and such, and we don't know how much further down you can go. Okay.
Yeah.
And so on the other end, we're looking out there around 10 billion or so light years, and we're seeing things that are rather different out there.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, but there might be all right.
I'm sorry. I'm saying it is exciting, the things that are being discovered. So
sure, yes, no question.
Yeah. The what I'm hearing from you is, like a lot of science, it's things continue to be developed, discovered. So I don't know if they're really for us. There's an end to studying, discovering, finding new things, because we're going to have, you said, a new telescope. It's going to help us see more, but we know there's more beyond that. And so we really, even though we have this amazing technology, we are still limited as to how much we can learn, because we are, because that's,
yeah.
So to look at science as just whatever is there in front of us and describing science from that term without involving the possibility that there is a God and you know, he is out there and he is involved in the universe. He has something to do with that. We're just basically limiting ourselves, and we can't in fact understand everything, because we don't have all the ability to, all the technology, and you know, we're still missing some things, like it or not. And so we're just limited to whatever we do have that we think is pretty good, but we don't know what is beyond that one area we can see, you know, up to the 10 billion light years. So that just makes you, that means we're just, if we're not acknowledging there's a God out there, we're just so limiting ourselves to whatever we think is in front of us. So,
well, I think the problem is even worse than that. Although, as I say, we don't know how much further things go, and there's lots that we haven't discovered yet. What we have discovered already seems to me to point very strongly in the direction that we live in a designed universe, not a universe that has always been, or a universe that just happened, and not in a universe in which a chance is the explanation for the very striking complexity and organization that we see in living things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if we're analyzing things and we're totally leaving the designer out, then we're not going to be seeing things accurately. I mean,
yeah, and this is basically what I was trying to say in this article to Jewish doctors, is that what we know in cosmology points to a beginning of the universe. It points to a fine-tuned universe, a universe in which the basic forces have been very tightly adjusted so that they can work together and produce a universe in which life can exist, and that the presence of living things in the universe is something that's way beyond the capabilities of random phenomena to have produced, and that these things point very strongly to a designer.
Yeah. So, about scientific facts, can you share with us a few scientific facts that confirmed there was a beginning to life? Because in one of your articles, you said that part of the problem with cosmology or science nowadays is that there's this avoiding at looking at the beginning of the universe, even though there is continuing mounting evidence. So can you share with us a few scientific facts that confirm there was a beginning?
Basically, at the beginning of the 20th century, 1900, the rather standard view among cosmologists was that the universe had always been. And then early in the 20th century, evidence turned up that the universe was expanding, that the galaxies were moving further and further apart. And so if you say, okay, if they're moving further and further apart, then if you imagine going back in time, they were closer and closer together. And at one point, they were all crunched together. And this came to be known as the Big Bang. And the first cosmologist to do anything with this was a Roman Catholic cosmologist named George Lemaitre. And he pointed out then kind of that the universe had a beginning at that point. And that, as I say, was not a happy thought for those scientists who put all their eggs in the naturalistic basket, that no supernature exists, no supernatural causes exist. And so they postulated, one group of them postulated a universe that was in what they call a steady state, that new matter was popping into existence everywhere in the universe, and the universe was expanding to make room for this, but the universe had always been. And so that went on for a good while until that was kind of knocked off the stage by the discovery that the universe in that model would be something that would look the same at all times and all distances, basically, and that our universe didn't look the same at all times and distances. It looked very different, looked more crowded back in the past. And so that pointed to a universe that really had been expanding, and we got into what we call the Big Bang universes. And then a couple of models of that sort were proposed to avoid a beginning, a universe in which the universe collapsed once and bounced at the Big Bang and then is expanding again. And then another universe that expanded and collapsed every, say, 100 billion years, what we call a one bounce and a oscillating universe. And evidence has now shown that neither of those work. And so to avoid a beginning, cosmologists that are in that, with that inclination, are now going to the idea that we really live in a universe that's always been, but it's kind of like a can of Coca-Cola or something of that sort, where when you open it, bubbles form inside and they come up to the top, they get bigger and they come to the top. So here, our universe is a bubble in this, our local universe is a bubble in this big universe, and it's expanding. And the Big Bang was basically just the formation of that bubble. At the moment, that's where cosmologists who want to avoid a beginning are. So, as I suggest there, the history of cosmology in the 20th and still in the 21st century, I guess, has been a more and more frantic attempt to avoid a beginning, in spite of the evidence that we've got something of that sort. So that's basically what I meant with that particular remark in my paper.
So why are they avoiding looking at the beginning?
Well, you could, of course, postulate a beginning in which the universe popped into existence without a cause. The cosmologist, I'm getting old now at 77, and my memory of names is worse than it was. The fellow in the wheelchair that just passed away recently.
I know. I don't
Hawking, Stephen Hawking.
Okay.
He proposed that, but very few scientists are willing to go with a universe popping into existence without a cause. So most of them are either going with the universe has always been, or those who at least are open to the existence of a God would say, well, the universe was created. And there are a number of people out there who are scientists who believe that that's the case. So that's kind of where we are in the question, the origins question in cosmology. There's this other thing that's turned up in the last generation or so, which I call fine-tuning. And that is the realization that our universe is very, very special. That if gravity were a little stronger or a little weaker than it is, then our universe wouldn't work. Mm-hmm. And the same would be true of the other forces that we know about, the strong force that holds the nuclei of atoms together, and the weak force that is a little vaguer but operates inside the neutron and other things. And then the electromagnetic force, which we're much more familiar with. All of these, if they're just a little bit different than they are, either bigger or smaller, you'll have a universe that either doesn't exist long enough for life to exist, or doesn't have the right properties for life to exist. So scientists have been talking now for, say, a generation or so about a fine-tuned universe, just the right way that these things can exist.
Right.
Now, the atheist has had to back away from their old position to the idea that we must live in a reality that there are almost an infinite number of universes in order for a few to have all the right things. Because if these things just are matters of chance, then there's a absolutely minuscule possibility that there would be universes that had everything just right. And so that has developed in atheistic circles in the last 20 years or so, let's say. And that's a very different position from where they used to be. Atheists have typically felt that they're the people who are working on the basis of what evidence points to, but now they have postulated a near infinity of universes for which we have no evidence. Whereas if there's a God, you only need to have one universe because he designed it. He might, of course, design lots of other universes, and maybe we'll find out one day. But so in this point, those who are believers in God are actually operating much closer to the evidence than are those who don't believe there's a God.
Right. So you're saying the view of atheists has changed because it's not in their comfort zone anymore.
Yeah, that's certainly. And that's, of course, a feature of science in any case. And I'm talking about science in either definition. And that is, when we study the world, whether it's a microscopic world or our size world, or whether we're looking at out in the universe, there are lots of surprises. Mm-hmm. And you don't know what those are until you find them.
Right.
And so typically we use what the medievalists called Occam's razor to say, let's make the simplest hypothesis we can consistent with the data. But that again keeps getting shattered when we find new data that suggests that there's something more complicated than that actually going on.
Right. So if you start making those, and they're almost like assumptions because they're just deciding what is going to be considered true science based on whatever facts are available at the time. But tomorrow that could totally change, which has happened with science many times.
And that's not bad as a methodology, but you need a certain amount of humility to go with it. You need to say, well, this is what it looks like now, but we don't know. Now, you could argue the same thing again regarding Christians, regarding Bible believers, regarding people who believe in God, and that's certainly true in many, many ways, but there's one difference, and that is if the Bible really is what it claims to be, then we're actually getting a revelation from the one who put the universe together. And so he will know some things that we maybe have not found out yet or have not been willing to admit yet. And so we expect then that he won't be surprised, if you like.
Yeah.
And if we're careful interpreting his word and interpreting his world, we'll still be surprised some, but we should not be disastrously surprised, if you like.
Yeah. So, talking about so everything having to, you used another phrase for that everything has to be just right in order for the existence of life. So,
yeah.
how can...
I don't think...
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I don't think anybody would have thought that 50 or 100 years ago. They would have thought that things could be rather different. You could have a stronger or weaker basic force of gravity, or a stronger or weaker basic electromagnetic force, and you'd get a different universe, but you might have different kinds of life in that or something of that sort. But now appears that there's very narrow boundaries within which the universe will work at all, if you like, at least as far as we're thinking of life being able to exist and that sort of thing.
Well, can you give us a specific example about something in the universe right now, or even on Earth, that if it was just off by a minuscule, or that wouldn't allow life, or wouldn't allow life the way we know it?
If we think about the balance between the expansion of the universe and the constant of gravitation, if the universe is expanding too fast, there's not an opportunity for the matter to collapse together to form stars and planets and that sort of thing. And so there would have been no life, because there had been at least no life of that kind of sort that we know about, chemical, physical life, because the universe would have expanded too fast and would never have formed stars and planets and such. But on the other hand, if this gravity had been strong enough to overcome that, the universe would have collapsed back on itself, and none of these things would have happened either. So the universe in its history has been in a narrow band where it's not expanding so fast that matter cannot pull together and form stars and planets and such, and it's not pulling together so fast that it would collapse and not form anything. So that'd be one example of that particular type of thing. You get similar examples with the relationship between the electromagnetic force and gravity, or between the strong nuclear force and gravity, on the nature of stars, or that sort of thing. And again, this is discussed in some detail in the book by Hugh Ross called The Creator and the Cosmos. It's discussed in some detail in a book with the jaw-breaking title, The Anthropic Cosmological Principle, by two fellows who are, as far as I know, not believers in God at all, and yet there's really actually probably dozens of books out there that discuss that, but the titles are not coming out of the top of my head at the moment.
Okay.
Told you my memory is going down.
Well, we can talk about, you actually have a couple of books. I don't know if any of those, any of that information is in a couple of your books.
Let's see. My book, Genesis 1 and the Origin of the Earth, which was first published by InterVarsity back in 1977, and then with some help from a friend, was updated in 2007. That is available on Amazon, Genesis 1 and the Origin of the Earth. And that discusses more detail on nice correlation between the Genesis account, Genesis 1, and what we know today about the origin of our solar system and the planet Earth and its early history and such. So that's not so much about fine-tuning. That's about this other matter. But I think it's very good evidence that we live in a universe that not only was God created, but that the Bible is a revelation from Him.
Yeah. So, okay, so can you expand on fine-tuning as far as how this confirms the Bible?
The Bible, as far as I know, doesn't actually mention the phrase, although that's a modern phrase based on, I suppose, musicology or something of that sort. But the Bible certainly says that the universe and humans and such were created by God's wisdom. And so we should expect to find evidence of wisdom in nature. And that's a very striking thing that we do find in nature, that on a atheist model, the universe is basically a result of chance in some sense. I mean, if they take the universe to all it existed, it just is, all right. But anything that happens in it is a result of chance. But in the biblical model, God is in control of these things, and He has designed them to be a certain way. So the Bible speaks of humans as being fearfully and wonderfully made. And as we've gotten into biology, we found more and more evidence of that sort of thing. It's not been 20 years now since we were beginning to understand something about how DNA works and what decoding the DNA of the human body and of the other animals and plants and such was going to tell us. And the idea came up then that there was a bunch of stuff that was in the DNA of humans that that looked like it wasn't involved in coding how proteins were put together. And so scientists began to call this junk DNA. And they basically said, well, most of the DNA in our body is junk DNA. And the reason for that is because mutations are something that is random, and the humans and the DNA of the various kinds of animals and such are not able to get rid of all of this, so they basically just set it on a sidetrack, if you like, and it accumulates. And so most of the DNA is junk. And that was rather concerned to me when I first heard about it. Mm-hmm. And yet I said, well, maybe that's God's mechanism of protecting against that. But now in the last 10 or 20 years, it's turned out that this isn't junk. This DNA is not making proteins, but it's doing something different. It's controlling when various parts of the other parts of the DNA are turned on or turned off and guiding its operation. So it's more like a computer program. And so as far as we can tell, a very large fraction, and maybe all of the DNA, is actually doing things. And the work of Project ENCODE, ENCODE, is what discovered that this stuff was not junk, as had been previously thought. So there's an example of something that's not exactly fine-tuning, but it's certainly an example of wisdom, if you like. Yeah. And then trying to figure out how random processes can construct not only the very complicated beings that humans and animals and plants and all these things are, but actually do it in a very efficient, sophisticated way that all of this stuff fits together. That does not look like random phenomena.
Right. There's a purpose for everything. It's not just junk, to be disposed of because it's not necessary. So that is a good point that they did discover that wasn't junk after all and start doing some things to, disregard that. That's huge. It's another example that we don't know everything and we are learning as we go, and that's a constant situation in science. And
yes,
whether
it's really a constant phenomenon of any kind of discovery. But science is, with the development of new technologies and such, has really begun to uncover lots of stuff that just was not known by humans before our last few years even. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, it's not pointing in an atheistic direction.
Yeah. So you talked about Hugh Ross. He wrote a book. I don't recall what the name of that book is, but he went through a lot of scientific information and found a lot of dozens of features. I'm just going to write what you wrote on this one article. Hugh Ross combed through a good deal of the recent scientific literature and has found dozens of features about our planet which have to be just right in order to have life here.
Yes.
You can't have much or less oxygen or carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. You need to have a star very much like ours, the sun. You need a large moon like we have. You need a big planet out there where Jupiter is. Our sun needs to be in the right part of our galaxy and so forth. And you said there's about over 60 of the features that have to be a certain way in order for us to have this wonderful Earth for us to live in, and we are in our particular galaxy neighborhood. We're the only ones with life, which is pretty amazing. So Ross's calculations suggest that finding even one really Earth-like planet would be a big surprise. If only chance is at work. God, of course, could have made as many as he wished because he is God, the designer. So going back to God, Genesis talks about God. The book of Genesis and the Jewish Bible talks about God creating the sun and the moon and the stars and then the earth and then separating the water from the land and creating the plants and animals and so on and so forth. And it says that he did it in just days. So we're bringing up a topic that I think a lot of scientists go, well, the Bible can't be true. Perhaps this is one of the reasons is because it says it was done in days. So what do you think about the time it took for all these things to be created?
Yeah. Let's back up just a little bit before we come into that. And think in evangelical Christian circles, there have been kind of three models for fitting together the Bible and science. And that would be over on one end, the young earth creation model, that the universe is a few thousand years old, and that everything was created, universe included, in a course of 7 literal consecutive days. On the other end, you have what are called the theistic evolutionists. I'm not here going over to the atheistic evolutionists, but the theistic evolutionists who believe that the universe is quite old and that God created by means of what we might call providence rather than miracle. So he guided evolution or designed evolution to work the right way. In the middle are those who are called old earth creationists, and I would class myself as one of these. We believe that the young earth guys are mistaken in thinking that the Bible requires a earth only a few thousand years old, but we believe that the theistic evolutionists are mistaken in thinking that purely providential phenomena will explain the great organized complexity that we see in living things. And so we believe that the universe is very old, that it's billions of years old, and the Earth is 4.5 billion or so, and that sort of thing. But that the phenomena of mutation and natural selection is not capable of generating the existence of life, for instance. Almost as soon as the Earth has cooled off enough to allow life to exist, nor capable of generating all of the organized complexity that we actually see in living things. So, now back to your question. I believe the evidence that God has given us in nature points to an old universe and an old Earth. And there are several good books out there in that particular direction. I've got one right here, if I can pull this out of the way and look at it here. Titled The Grand Canyon, Monument to an Ancient Earth, by Carol Hill and several others. That's available on Amazon. It's probably available lots of other places, but that's where I get my books. And then two books by a friend of mine, Dan Wonderly, who's now passed on. God's Time Records in Ancient Sediments and Neglect of Geologic Data. All three of those are available on Amazon, and they all point to an old universe and an old Earth. And that in contradistinction of the claim by young Earth creationists that all the geologic record is a result of a one-year flood. The Grand Canyon one there deals with that in the easiest to understand way. So I believe that the days we're looking at in Genesis are probably not literal days, or if they are literal days separated by long periods of time. Mm-hmm. That second alternative, literal days separated by long periods of time, is the direction I went in my book, Genesis 1 and the Origin of the Earth. Certainly the Bible uses both literal language and figures of speech. In fact, you find on a couple of occasions that the disciples of Jesus are not sure whether he's speaking literally or figuratively in particular points. What's most interesting is that the one psalm that speaks of the day as 1,000 years and 1,000 years is a day, that sort of thing, is the one psalm that we're told is written by Moses. And Moses, we understand, is the one who wrote the Genesis account. Mm-hmm. And so he certainly leaves room open that the days in Genesis might not be literal.
So you're talking about Psalm 90, the psalm that was written by Moses. I think a lot of people feel like I did, like I used to, that all the psalms are written by David, and most of them are. But
most of them are. I would accept any of them are that for which the psalm title says it's the Psalm of David.
Yeah.
But this is one that's by Moses. There's one that's by Solomon, I believe. There are quite a few by the sons of Korah and by Asaph and such. But yes, most of them were by David.
Yeah,
but this one's
90,
by Moses.
Yeah, 90 says Moses. Yeah, that was really neat. Yeah, Psalm 90 says, for 1,000 years in your sight is like a day. So here is Moses, who wrote Genesis 1, for anyone out there in our audience that it wasn't aware of that. And which is amazing what he wrote, being a person, he wasn't a modern day scientist. He didn't have a telescope. He didn't have any tools to learn about the universe. And he had some education, being raised in the palace of Pharaoh. But how he writes, it's like God was right next to him explaining how he, giving him perhaps a vision of how the universe and the earth came to be. Mm-hmm. And so now in Psalm 90 he says 1,000 years is like a day to God. Sure. And in Genesis he talks about everything going by days. So could the Bible be wrong about the age, the earth. In this case, you think that it almost sounds like Moses is contradicting himself, but I think there's another explanation. Do you have another explanation?
No. I think that those people who think the universe is young because that's what the Bible teaches, I think they're mistaken about what the Bible teaches. I don't think the Bible's wrong. All the work I've done over my career has convinced me, has reaffirmed for me that the Bible knows what it's talking about, and that we will find that all confirmed one day that we may not all have found confirmed yet. But so that would be basically my treatment there. There's a book out by David Snoke, whose title I'm not sure I can pull down here.
How do you spell his last name? David.
Who?
How do you spell his last name, David's last name?
I'm not getting the name from you.
How do you spell David Snoke?
Snoke. S-N-O-K-E, Snoke.
Okay.
Something like Biblical Evidence of an Old Earth or something like that. Nicely done. He's a professor of physics at University of Pittsburgh and a elder in the Evangelical Presbyterian Church of America. And he's done quite a nice job in that direction. As I say, my own model in my book, Genesis 1, the Orders of the Earth, which we do spend a good bit of time discussing the biblical material, is that we're looking at a old universe, old Earth, but that we're looking at literal days separated by large gaps of time. Right. And I'm not sure that's the right way to go with it. The other model is what's called a day-age view, that the days are actually ages. And basically we're trying to fit together the data that God has given us in nature and the data that God has given us in his Bible.
So you said in an article concerning the issue of the Bible saying that the earth was created in days, that you said in one article, it says, I don't believe the Bible is wrong, but I think the Bible has been wrongly interpreted.
Yes. Nature tells us how things really are, and it's a message from the God who cannot lie. And the Bible tells us how things are, and it's a message from the God who cannot lie. But we are finite humans and fallen humans on top of that. And so we can both lie and be honestly mistaken. And so we need to do what we can to understand reality, both in nature and in Scripture.
Right.
And I suspect the disagreements on Christians on that are not going to go away till the Lord returns.
Yeah.
But we still have a responsibility doing what we can. So
there are other topics that we might not have a chance to get to on this show. We've got about 5 more minutes to go. But I wanted to talk right now, continuing the conversation about Genesis 1. Can you share the correlation between the creation account in Genesis 1 and science such as astronomy and geology regarding the beginnings of the earth?
Yeah, let me pull out a sheet of paper here that I can read that off of. Here it is here. Okay. I suggest that if we work on it, we can actually find a very nice correlation between a creation count in Genesis 1 and a reasonable model from astronomy and geology for the Earth's origin and early destiny.
Yeah.
The Earth, with the sun and other planets, according to science, was once a shapeless, empty gas cloud. And you remember Genesis says the Earth was without form and void. And in the scientific model, as this gas cloud begins to collapse, it becomes dark within. So if we imagine that the observer who is describing this is riding along with a piece of what's eventually going to be the Earth, it will get dark all around him or her. And it says in Genesis, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And then as it continues to collapse, the whole cloud begins to glow. And so we have the biblical statement, God said, let there be light, and there was light. And then the material that's going to form the planets is pushed out of this cloud and forms up into a band around the outside. And then the Bible speaks of God separating between light and darkness. And so that's rather interesting, because at that point, you'd look back towards the gas cloud that's going to be the sun, and there'd be light, and you'd look up in the other directions, and there would be basically darkness. And then these little particles that are in this band that are rotating around outside the gas cloud of the sun, they are going to collide with one another and form up into rotating planets with day on one side, the side towards the sun, and night on the other. And it said God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And then the Earth's atmosphere is produced, according to science, from within the planet, separating the waters into the surface water and the atmospheric water. And the Bible speaks of the two waters, and the firmament is the King James translation, the expanse between them, which I understand to be the atmosphere. And then, according to science now, in the last half century or so, the surface of our planet consists of these continental plates, or actually, they're not necessarily continents, these plates moving around on the surface, and these open up ocean basins and eventually develop continents to provide dry land, and so you get separation between the water and the dry land. And then you get plant life that appears on the surface, and that plant life removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, which lowers the Earth's temperature and begins to provide oxygen for animal life. And it even clears the sky so that the sun and moon and the stars now become visible from down on the Earth. Before then, they were covered up by all this cloud cover. And then the various forms of animal life appear on the Earth. And finally, mankind was created. And this I work out in some detail in my book, Genesis 1 and the Origin of the Earth, which, as I said, is available from Amazon, both in hard copy and in Kindle ebook.
Yeah.
So you can see how it goes in more detail there. Here's just part of a paragraph. I've been convinced in my time studying these things that God really does exist. He's the God of the Bible, but he's also the God of the universe. And that we live in a marvelous universe he's put together. There are complications due to the fall of humans, and I'm not sure what additional complications on top of that due to the fall of Satan, because we don't know quite how much range of power he might have. But I think those things are all things for which what the Bible has to say is consistent with what we are finding out in nature and the studies of science, even though many scientists are not anxious to go in these kind of directions. So I would urge us to pay attention to what the Bible has to tell us about things that are what we might call spiritual matters, things about our relationship to God and our need for someone to rescue us from our own sinfulness. That's what Jesus the Messiah has done for us.
All right. Thank you so much. We've been interviewing Dr. Robert C. Newman. And he has a book, Genesis 1 and the Origin of the Earth, and it's on Amazon. I encourage you to get that book. And we'd like to have you back to develop more. Part of it we didn't talk about is evolution, things like that. And so we'd love to have you back to share with us some more. Thank you again, Dr. Newman, for being with us today at Tikvah. Thank you for listening to Tikvah Radio Show, the voice of hope.